to provoke us into discussion, and then the floor will be open for questions and discussion for the rest of the session until lunchtime.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. So, welcome to Gothenburg, everyone. So I want to start with the PC chair report, which involves presenting the usual statistics. So this year we had a total of 32 submissions, that's including experience reports, functional pearls, and systems demonstrations. Of those 32, we accepted 12. As you can see, we didn't accept any functional pearls, and we included all systems demonstrations. How does this compare to past years? It's okay. I'm not sure exactly what these figures are counting, whether they're counting systems demonstrations as well. So my feeling is that we're slightly down, especially kind of low 30s is slightly less than I would have liked. But I asked Manuel for the ICFP numbers so I could compare. And this doesn't tell you much, but I made a graph. And because I'm not smart enough to get kind of two different sizes on the y-axis, I've actually multiplied the number of Haskell Symposium submissions by 3. And that gives you an indication of what the trend is. And you can see that sometimes the Haskell Symposium follows ICFP. Like here we had an increase and then a dip, and the same happened with ICFP. But other years the trend is reversed, so this doesn't really tell you anything. Author affiliations. We get submissions from all over the world, but mostly based in Europe and the US. I don't think that's a surprise. A little bit about the reviewing process. Each paper received at least 3 reviews, and we used EasyChair to hold an electronic PC discussion. It's always a tight deadline for the Haskell Symposium. I think one of the problems is that we try to have our deadline a week after the ICFP notification, but we draw quite a lot of submissions, especially compared to some of the smaller workshops, so I really want to compliment the PC for their work, because it means working to quite a tight deadline and still being able to produce high-quality reviews is really commendable. So one thing we did is we asked people to register their abstract so that we could kind of pipeline the reviewing process. And what I did is people who registered an abstract but eventually didn't submit a full paper, I invited them to submit a systems demonstration. I think a few of those people actually did so, and I think we got some great talks out of that. Here's the program committee. I want to thank a lot of people now. You could read all their names, and we had a whole lot of external reviewers as well who really helped. And I want to mention all the people in the steering committee, in particular Janus Voigtlander has provided me with a lot of help, and he has extensive documentation and notes which really helped smooth the process for me. But this is already boring. All of you are sitting here with the single question of how can I get my Haskell Symposium 2015 paper accepted. And of course, being scientists, we're looking for some kind of scientific method. So I've tried to condense this down into some advice. So the first one is find co-authors, because it's actually much easier to get papers accepted if you have co-authors. In particular, find co-authors from Turkey, Belgium, and Poland, because that really increases your chances. And try to avoid submitting functional pearls, because they're quite hard to get accepted, but systems demonstrations and experience reports have a much higher rate of acceptance. But the most important thing is keep submitting great papers. I think we've had a fantastic program in this year so far, and I'm really happy with the submissions we draw out. A little bit about the format. So we have a 2-day symposium again. We have 2 invited speaker sessions. We have room for longer talks, slightly longer than ICFP. We have room for a future of Haskell discussion, and no panel sessions. One of the other design decisions is I decided that I wouldn't try to pad the program, and if we finish at like 3:30 on Friday, the week's long enough and everyone's tired, and some people are staying on in the weekend even. So if you're really keen to go see talks, there's lots of other workshops and sessions that you could go to. But speaking for myself, I'm always quite happy when the symposium's over. So, it's tiring, yeah. So let us know what you think. I set up a Google questionnaire survey, and there are basically 2 questions there. What did you like best, and what could we do better? And the feedback I'm looking for is not, I really like this talk, but this is what worked well in this format. And if you missed the panel sessions, let us know. If you want longer talks, let us know. Whatever. Before I move on to the future of Haskell discussion, I want to repeat what Ken Shaw said last year about compassion. I think the Haskell Symposium should try to be a safe place for academic discussion that fosters dignity and respect, and I realized that there were some remarks yesterday that people found inappropriate. I want to kind of tell you guys that we've spoken to the people involved, and we'd really like to move on from here. The Haskell Symposium is part of ACM Sigplan, and we subscribe and try to enforce the anti-harassment policy, but try to be nice. That's the bottom line. And if you ever feel excluded or left out, let the organizers know. And that way we can make the Haskell Symposium a better place for all of us. Moving on. The future of Haskell. This is the fun part. So it used to be that next year's PC chair would actually give a few slides about the future of Haskell. But because we actually haven't chosen who that is yet, and the timing has changed a bit, I'll do it this year. So what I'll do is I'll try to start the discussion, and I'll tell you what I did exactly to generate the slides and what my methodology was. But if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. I'd much rather have an open discussion than me finish just all my slides. I'd like to also emphasize that I'm not the Haskell community, and I can't speak for the Haskell community, that we're the Haskell community. So if you have things to share, just let me know. And of course, there's a disclaimer that everything I say is so what did I do? How do you evaluate the state of Haskell? So I did a standard kind of strategic planning thing, is that I started to think about the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. And I should explain that this typically gives you a really long list of things which you could talk about. What I did is I tried to group them thematically so it wouldn't just be a bunch of ideas, and then I sorted them in increasing level of controversy. So the talk should get more interesting as we go on. A little bit about technology first. I think we've seen huge step forwards in in infrastructure and support in the last few years. So we've seen the Haskell platform emerge as a double-clickable installer, which gives you all the packages you need to get started. There are nearly 10,000 packages on Hackage nowadays, and Cabal, it's not perfect, and I know you can get into problems if you use it in certain ways, but it saves you a lot of hassle installing things like that. And I think the volunteers who work on all these tools, they really deserve our gratitude. They're doing a great job. GHC. So this is the world's best production type system, and it produces code that's faster than C. And there's fantastic parallelism technology. And this is something which doesn't need any fine print. It's used both in research and by industry. I think this is a really unique selling point. It's a fantastic vehicle. There's lots of great research that comes out of GHC, but there's lots of users who use GHC in a production environment. So moving on to more soft issues, the community. We don't see many evil trolls. So this is actually a literal transcript from a session, it's quite famous, some of you I'm sure have seen this already, about a discussion on the IRC channel when someone kind of comes into the Haskell IRC channel and says, okay, you can read that yourself, I've kind of tidied it up, I didn't want to put the literal text on the slide. And then people ask for, moderators to show up, and they say, do you have any specific questions, maybe we can help you. And then the XQ guy says, I was just trying to get kicked out of a bunch of channels for fun. And then Haskell kind of person says, well, you've seen Learn You a Haskell, it's a really enjoyable book on Haskell, and it's very uplifting and accessible. And then there's some more discussion. And then Troll says, why is no one cooperating with me? And then he asks, what's Haskell good for? And it turns out he's interested in game development, and that you can generate a JavaScript from Haskell is kind of interesting for him. And then he said, okay. So this is like a real success story, right? I'm really happy with this transcript. It kind of demonstrates the positive attitude that you see in this community. So there's also a more insidious kind of troll that I do want to warn people about, which is the kind of the smart aleck troll, which is when, this isn't a real transcript, this is one I made up, but it's someone who comes onto the Haskell RC or the mailing list or whatever and says, hi, I'm trying to learn Haskell, what is a monad? And then someone says, oh, that's, it's just a keyboard. Okay. right? You know this answer, right? But then someone else says, I can one-up that, and all monads are actually the composition of the adjoint functors. So you shouldn't start by learning monads, you should start by learning adjunctions. And then someone else says McLean or GTFO. A note about diversity once again. As a community, I think we're predominantly consisting of white males, which means that we can be biased in our values. It's not a bad thing, it's not something we can change overnight, but it is something we need to be aware of. So once again, please show compassion to your fellow Haskellers. Okay, this is where the controversy starts, I guess. I have good news and I have bad news, and I'm going to start with the bad news. Haskell's dead. Or at least I'm going to say it's in some state of suspended animation. It's going the way of the dinosaurs. Who remembers this guy? Yes, a few hands. This used to be the GHC logo. I had to do some serious internet archival digging to find this guy. It's happydinosaur.gif of the Wayback Machine. We've seen our own Haskell dinosaurs this week as well, complaining that GHC and extensions are ruining our language. And we should stick with Haskell 1.3. And so as much as I love all the work on type systems that we've seen this week, and I love all the presentations that we've seen, this next slide, your compiler's not optimizing, the new type coercions are not disappearing. Let me fix your type system for you. So, whatever happened to Curry Howard, right? What happened to this idea that a type system is a logic, and that anything we extend to the type system should have a logical interpretation? We should try to keep things simple. But they're right when they say this is what users want, and we've seen fantastic opportunities to use this stuff in Stephanie's keynotes, in the talks at the Symposium as well. So what do I mean when Haskell's dead? So here's a slide I stole, and by the font in the header you can probably guess who made this slide. And this is where Simon PJ, he talks about successful languages. And these are successful languages. As you can see, they're launched, and they get a massive number of practitioners using these languages, and they grow onto the threshold of immortality. And they don't die out. And a lot of research languages, there's some active research, and if you're lucky, you get more than one user, and then they peter out after maybe 10 years when someone finishes their PhD. So what makes these languages so successful? They're backed by huge companies. They run on mature platforms, .NET or JVM. They have a GUI library that works. And one thing that you can see is if you look at languages like C# or Java, they're stealing all our good ideas. So the advantages of using Haskell are diminishing. So this is coming back to the tension, which is on the one hand a great strength of GHC, that it's used by industry and in research. That means that you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You can't compete with huge languages. You don't have the corporate sponsors that they do. They have a lot of Haskell has a lot of baggage. It's hard to be truly innovative and kind of compete with small languages like Idris or Agda, who have fancy type systems. And the GHC developers, they know they have a lot of users, and the choices they make are understandable. When they say, for the concrete example, when they talk about how to handle this cost-free coercions, they had a choice of either being backwards not compatible or doing something which might be a little bit nicer, and they chose backward compatibility, and understandably so. So this was the bad news. Long live Haskell. Haskell's a huge success. It's been tremendously influential. So here's an example. I'm thinking of a language, and you have to guess which language I'm thinking of. So it's higher order functions, algebraic data types, so okay, it could still be something like OCaml, pattern matching, strongly typed, type inference, it's probably not racket. Distinction between values and references, okay. Polymorphic polymorphism, yeah, we've seen that. Ad hoc polymorphism, probably not OCaml. Monads and maybes over nilpoints. Any ideas what language I'm thinking of?
Swift.
People who know me, of course, knew what was coming. So Swift, this is Apple's new programming language. What we see here is we see one of the biggest companies in computers, right? And they're putting serious money and serious effort into developing a new language, which takes a lot of good ideas from Haskell. It explicitly lists Haskell as a big influence on the language design. So the ideas are winning, even if in that kind of following that metric, I think Haskell's a huge success. This is another nice graph. So what this shows is mentions on Reddit, which is an online forum where people can talk about all kinds of stuff, but they also talk about languages. And you can see something like here, which kind of describes the JavaScript Reddit. And the lines represent mentions in JavaScript of other languages. And the thickness of the lines determines how often the language is mentioned. And what you can see is that big languages talk about one another. So Java mentions a lot of Python. You can see Haskell up here, it's not very big, but there's some communication with Rust and Scala. But what's interesting is if you actually index this relative to the TO value, which kind of measures how popular a language is, you can suddenly see that everyone's talking about Haskell, despite the fact that it's not a big language. So this is what I mean when I think that Haskell is enormously influential. So if nothing else, I think that Haskell may be dead, but it has shown us the value of pure functional programming. So on that note, I'd like to open the floor, and thank you very much. So one last thing though, please share your thoughts. I know it's scary to speak. I'm always terrified before I talk. And I know it's really scary to ask a question or get up and walk to one of the microphones. But especially if you're a newcomer, if you're unfamiliar here, we'd really like to hear from you guys. Because it's very easy to kind of just be very introspective, but you guys might have something new to say, instead of the usual things I hear at the Haskell Symposium every year. So here are a few talking points besides what I said, of things that people have come up to me and said, we should really talk about these things. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
So, microphones are open.
Hi, yeah. So I'm Gershom, and for people that don't know me, I organize the New York Haskell Users Group, among other things. I wanted to largely, or briefly, talk about sort of stuff there that I think maybe runs a bit counter to this Haskell is dead story, which is, it has grown beyond whatever we expected from the moment we started it. I didn't think we could start it, and other people talked me into it because they thought that, no, there's a market out there, people will come. And more people have come than we've realized, and they tell me that they're doing things that I've never heard of people doing with Haskell. I mean, not like new things, but just there's companies I haven't heard of doing things I haven't heard of all over the city. And then a lot of them will only come to one meeting, so then they go away, and there's probably many more of them that never come to any meetings. So there's this enormous growth of, you might call it dark Haskell. They don't show up on the mailing list or whatever. And, they don't come to my meetup often either. And that is out there, and it is taking off in a way that I had never imagined it would. In the city as well, the meetup is so large in a way that it's spun off tiny meetups for reading groups for different things. So we have like child meetups already. And I don't know how this all happened. But my point is just that I don't think that it is dead in the sense that we're talking about. On the contrary, it's taking off in a way so that now when someone says, well, why hasn't the industry adopted Haskell? I say, no, it has. Right? Not just the people here, the people we've never met and may never meet. And so that, in that sense, there's also not just one Haskell community anymore. Because it's so broad, just like you can't say the Java community and have that mean anything, because everybody uses it, right? And I think we're actually going to have to start facing that almost even more. I want to have one other brief comment, though, which is, you made the point that you said, well, it's not our fault in a way the issues of diversity and so on. Now, as an meetup organizer, I worry about all the time, how can we have the broadest, most diverse group? So for me, I don't think it's my fault, but I do think it's my problem. And I think that's something we should all bear in mind.
So I'm very new to the Haskell community, and I have to say one of the things that has impressed me in the last 18 months or so that I've been doing some Haskell is how mindful and helpful the community really is. The slides that you showed really do translate my experience. Just asking questions on a forum and then sounding stupid, and trying to understand what the underlying motivations and ideas are. So I think that is fantastic, and I want to commend the community for keeping that fantastic vibe going. One aspect of Haskell that I believe is just not on par with the rest of the language, because I really find it hard to express what I feel is the elegance of Haskell, even when compared to other functional programming languages, which I think are just a little bit more verbose, is the module system. Right? So I was wondering, if there's plans in the future or plans more close by to maybe give a little more thought to that, because I think that's one thing that maybe doesn't give us as many research papers, but helping on that path towards immortality may really get us a lot more users along the way.
If I can answer that, come to Haskell workshop tomorrow, and I believe Edward Yang is talking about his work this summer, working with Simon on adding the first step to having a very nice module system and multi-version linking to GHC. So there is some work on that, and the extent that you care, you're welcome to try and figure out how you can help do work involving Cabal and how we handle, in this case, module systems. GHC dev is open, and it's really the users who drive how the innovation happens.
I just wanted to respond to the comment about backward compatibility. I actually think that needing to maintain backward compatibility keeps us honest. I do think that maybe the comment about coercibility and such, it might have been better if we didn't have to be backward compatible there. But in thinking about putting dependent types in Haskell, which I spend a lot of time thinking about, we need type inference to keep working in that environment. And the backward compatibility forces this, and I think that will lead to a better design of sort of that next step if that happens. The other point I'd like to make, because I know there's a lot of people who are here today won't be here tomorrow, is so I'm going to be sort of giving a bit of a preview of what I see as dependent Haskell and what I'm working on, and would love to hear back from people who think that that's not the right direction. I mean, it's the sort of the comments that Wouter was making about what's happening to this language. Maybe it doesn't need this fancy new type system. I would actually love to hear about that. And so do speak up, and so we can get sort of diversity of opinion there.
Hey, Andrew Talley from Anchor. I got a quote here that dug off IRC a year or so ago. It said, Haskell is an abstract research language used only in academia, education, banking, stock trading, circuit design, embedded systems, cryptography, operating systems research, bioinformatics, phone apps, and web services. Somebody named Jaffe on IRC, I gotta like. The thing is like, I want you to take that camera, stop it, delete the tape, and kill this Haskell's dead shit. Like, it's not. Go away. Okay, you, infecting the Swift, you don't count. But I've grown a team from me to 10 Haskellers in the last 6 months. And admittedly, I've forced some of them, but most of the people I'm hiring are coming out of the woodwork. They're desperately happy to not be writing PHP apps in Drupal anymore. And, where this goes and how successful I'm going to be in the medium hall with this remains to be seen. But Haskell's got a fantastic ecosystem. The quality of work that I can leverage. I can't read most of your code. Your libraries are insane. One of my staff said, yeah, I solved the problem by importing Edward. And she's hilarious. So I really encourage us to change the tenor of the debate, because if Haskell's dead leaves this room, you'll not kill it off for another 10 years. Haskell avoid success is bad enough. Let's try and flip the conversation. That'd be my contribution.
So one thing that I have to say really distinguishes how I've seen industrial Haskell use differ from the way people use other programming languages is when there's a debate about a language change, I see the industrial users pushing for the breaking changes, and the people who don't want to adjust the teaching materials being conservative. There was actually a debate about involving things like this semi-regularly, and it's kind of awesome that the industrial people are willing to tolerate thoughtfully regular breaking changes so they can have ever better tools. There's a cost to that, but it's one that people are usually happy to manage because their tools get better in ways that might not be tractable with a slightly different sort of amount of typing. And I think that's it's a very nice strength of the community that the industrial users really want the nicest things they can get. Thank you.
I've lost track of who was next. But,
Tim Chevalier Heroku. I want to go back to the comment a few comments ago sorry, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but about saying that in his experience, the Haskell community was quite friendly and welcoming. And that's also my experience, and I would guess that that's the experience of most of us, if not all of us, because if it hadn't been, we wouldn't be here. We would have left the community long ago. So there's a danger of selection bias when you, I guess, focus too much on the people who have made it and don't listen to the people who haven't. So what I mean by that is, I have personal friends from communities that are not Haskell who have said online, I got interested in Haskell, I thought this was really interesting and cool, I wanted to learn it, and then people on IRC, Twitter, or elsewhere who at least self-identified as being part of the community treated me like a jerk, and I felt bad about myself, and I left and stopped being interested. Now, I don't know what to say to those friends, because part of me gets defensive. I had a good experience myself, and Haskell, I feel like the Haskell community has been very good to me, and I want to say, those people who were mean to you, they're not real Haskell people, like the real ones, like me and my friends who I've known forever, the people in this room, they wouldn't act like that, which, I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it's still, as Wouter said, it's not, we didn't cause it, but it's still our problem. So if there is a population of, say, recent converts to Haskell who are prioritizing their own need to look smart, the smart Alec troll example that Wouter pointed out, ahead of being helpful to newcomers, truly helpful, not the monoid in the category of endofunctors kind of helpful, that's our problem. And I don't know what to do about it, and I don't know what to say to my friends who come to be talking about their pain. So maybe other people have ideas.
Thanks. John Wouter from BA Systems. I haven't been using Haskell for very long, but I've been programming for a really long time. And what I wanted to say is that what I found unique about Haskell is not necessarily its features as a programming language per se, but that it really seems to raise the level of dialogue. Never in all of my programming career was I ever interested in math or being a computer scientist. And my school had sort of failed me in that respect, and I moved to philosophy just because their CS department wasn't interesting me. And I realized that it wasn't that they didn't have interesting things to say. There was not a transition from what I knew to what was possible. And Haskell has become that transition, both for me and for a lot of people that I know. So we have our language, but we also have this sort of this gateway to an amazing, amazing, gigantic world that a lot of people are usually stay unfamiliar with, even though they're using the products of that world for their career. So I just want us to keep that in mind, that we think that we're thinking about Haskell, but Haskell is more than Haskell. Haskell has become a true force majeure in the programming world.
So I wanted to ask, not really a great question to ask, is kind of answer, but there's Haskell and then there's GHC. And I think a lot of the discussion here is about GHC rather than Haskell. And I saw a few years ago the Haskell 2010 effort, which kind of pulled in some extensions and said this is a nice set of extensions. Is that a process that's continuing in the Haskell community? Is there going to be a Haskell 2014 or a 2016 or something like that that takes the things that are universally agreed to be elegant extensions, or universally but generally agreed to be elegant extensions, things that, and put them together to push the base of the language forward?
Are there Haskell primals here? Does it still exist?
I guess that answer is no. But, so I would add a voice that that's a really valuable thing. Having that base there allows GHC and people like us to go berserk, doing whatever we want at the bleeding edge, because there's a safety net underneath where that can be relied on.
If I may share my experience on, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to share my experience and my perception of the Haskell standardization process. And I've never been a member of the Haskell Standards Committee. But when I started to use Haskell, sort of GHC was at that point where it didn't go far away from the Haskell standard. It already had JDDs and stuff, but it wasn't that big of a difference. And Haskell, like I was there at 2010 when Haskell, or was it 2011 when Haskell 2010 came out. And so I had a lot of sort of trust. I had a lot of how do you call it, credit of trust to the Haskell standard. But I think they ultimately let us down, because GHC has proven that it evolves, it sort of responds to the needs of the community, and Haskell standard just wasn't there for us. Like, we've all been waiting, and we've all seen this new standard committee being elected, and then the other one, and there's just no work being done. Like, I don't see any work being done. The last I saw was Ian Lina doing some very, very good stuff on sort of formalizing different Haskell extensions, but I guess no one just supported him, or I don't know what the issue was. The only thing I see is that Haskell is moving, like the GHC Haskell, as you call it, is moving farther and farther away from the Haskell standard. And the Haskell standard doesn't do anything to sort of reduce that gap. So, for example, my involvement with all this is, for the last maybe year or so, I've been co-maintaining Haskell Source X, which is kind of, and I also did Haskell Names, which provides the name resolution for Haskell Source X, which is kind of an alternative Haskell implementation. It's not a full compiler, very far from it. For example, it doesn't even have a type checker, but for some extent, it's an alternative Haskell implementation. And from my point of view, the Haskell standard is now just irrelevant. And at this point, I kind of have no trust in it. So I think if at some point there will be a new committee who has energy to move this forward, they would need to prove that they are relevant. Because at this point, yes, there is GHC Haskell. Just for me, there's no other Haskell, because there's no one who actually cares about this Haskell standard. So for me, yeah, the Haskell standard is dead. Haskell 2010 is a nice document. I sometimes go and consult it, because it formalizes some subset of Haskell, right? So it is useful as a document, but as a process, as a community, the Haskell standard just does not exist, and we have to admit it. We have to embrace what we do have is the GHC Haskell.
So I have a comment which is actually related to this, and something that I think is really, really awesome about Haskell is the language pragmas, the language extension pragmas, which is just an amazing thing. When I open up someone's source code and I look at it and I look at the top, and if there's no pragmas, then I know what's going on in the code. I can look at it, I know what features are there. Other languages that are very large, like C++, it's really, really hard to understand because there's so many features, and I don't know. I look at the code, it's like, oh, they're using this feature, and I don't know how they interact, and blah, blah, blah. So I think this is a thing that Haskell has, which I don't think many other languages have. I can't think of one right now. I'm sure there's probably other languages that have this, but it's so great that you can turn on these things, but there's still this core. The core of Haskell is pretty straightforward and really, really nice and clean and easy to program with, and this is the kind of things we teach to our students, the sort of going at the core. I think that's very powerful, and it relates to standards and all of this stuff, because we have all the kind of crazy cool new features going ahead, but you don't have to use them, and they can be off. So you look at a program and you don't have to worry, well, is this using some cool new dependent type thing? You don't have to worry about that if it's not on. So I think that's a really good thing that we've got. So thanks for whoever who came up with that, and I think that's important for this standards and language subsets and kind of situation.
On the left?
Yeah, I actually would like to put a criticism that I think it's mostly in the functional programming research community, is that we have I think we have a terrible naming problem, and you can see this because we have parametric polymorphism, and then they put this on C# and they call it generics, we have algebraic data types, and then they put it on Swift and they call it enumeration with a value. And yeah, but I think the point is that we've been for years trying to tell people, hey, this thing is different from C, is different from Java, that we even put different names, and I think this makes people really unaware of the ties between functional programming and other things that are out there. So I don't really know how to solve this problem because these names are already known to us, but I think this is some criticism I see from the community trying to still push other names and not accepting other names or other ideas of how you should look at first to all these features.
Bartosz Milewski, I'm mostly a blogger. I come from the C++ community, and I've been going to C++ conferences for many years, speaking about functional programming. And what I've noticed over the years, and especially last year and this year, there is a sea change, really. People are responding to functional programming differently. I mean, it used to be that when you mentioned the word Haskell, they would say, what is it, right? Now, when you say Haskell, they say, this is on my list of things to learn, right? When you mentioned monad, they would giggle. Nowadays, everybody wants to know what a monad is, and after I gave a talk this year, there were several people who stayed after the lecture and they asked me to explain to them the monad, and I talked about monad to this group of C++ programmers, and they were very interested. So I think that this influence that Haskell has on other language communities is really tremendous, and it's growing.
I just wanted to respond, I guess, to Roman's comments up there, because it can be easy in a forum like this to think of silence as agreement. I respectfully disagree in that I think it's important to have a language standard, and I think it's important not to have a language be defined by an implementation. And so, a GHC, the remarkable thing about it is that even as big and as complex as it's become, there's still a bunch of people contributing new ideas and pushing it further. And then we still need a backstop. We still need to know what's the core of this. What features here are so fundamental that actually we want to say this is part of the language as opposed to part of the implementation. And so that I just wanted to sort of put out the opposing viewpoint.
Simon, were you queuing or just stretching your legs?
I'm queuing.
Right.
I think one of the problems that we have as a community which has the best language is that it can prevent us from looking at other communities and trying to steal ideas from them. So Wouter said that look at Swift, they've taken all the good ideas from Haskell, and then we continue to develop Haskell, but we should also be looking at other languages to try and steal from them. And if we can't find language features, there should at least be applications. For example, in the last year I've learned about the Scala community, in particular a distributed database system called Spark. They have a system where you write a program with traditional combinators, map, fold, filter, that sort of thing. It compiles to a DAG. It runs it on clusters of thousands of machines. These systems are based on functional programming, using much of the same ideas as Haskell, but I don't see anything in the Haskell community which operates at the same scale as other communities. So perhaps we have the best language, but we don't have the same scale of applications in some areas. So I think we should pay attention to that.
Simon?
So the Cloud Haskell is a direct steal from Erlang, so there's been some theft, and there should be more. I do agree with what you said. I just wanted to respond to some of the things that have come up briefly. One is saying maybe Haskell's growing too much baggage, and what's become of the Curry-Howard isomorphism. So the rock to which I cling is that everything in GHC is compiled through this very small, strongly typed intermediate language, System FC. It only has 8 data constructors. There are the lambda calculus together with the quality coercions. And it's nothing that can't compile through that gets into GHC at the moment. So it means that while the surface is rough and bumpy sometimes and a bit ad hoc, there is a kind of intellectual core that it compiles through that I think is quite helpful to keep the language principled. In some sense, everything's syntactic sugar. So that's just a little defense. I'm sensitive about GHC having too much baggage because in some ways it does, and in some ways that's by design. So my default when people say, can I add this to GHC? It's kind of by default, yes. You let 1,000 flowers bloom, and hopefully, eventually somebody will come up with say, all right, so Haskell's just got too big now. Let's make a better thing, and that would be a good thing. So the other thing I wanted to just say is that despite being 25 years old, Haskell is still a hotbed of innovation. You've got to look at the talks that have been at this conference, both in application and the clever ways that people program using Haskell, and in the implementation, the interesting ideas that they add to the language. So despite being baggage full, right, because it is big now, it has maintained a kind of intellectual vitality that I think is something that we could all be quite proud of, actually. And I think it may have something to do with Haskell taking a very long, slow trajectory. Haskell is 25 years old, and GHC is very nearly as old. And that, rather than being sort of catapulted to immortality and then the concrete immediately sets, we've done this very slow thing. That's been very helpful to us. So somehow, lacking a corporate sponsor is a great help in some ways, right? Because it means we can do things slowly and then maybe do them right or do them, change our minds in a backward, incompatible way. So that's something else I think we should cherish and be proud of rather than regard as a disadvantage. But it does carry a risk, and this is where I wanted to finish, which is that because there is no corporate sponsor, Haskell and GHC in particular is a very large open source community experiment. We're trying to do something pretty awesomely big without a single large sponsor standing behind it, and that relies on a lot of people contributing. And increasingly a lot of people do, but I still feel as if one of the risks to our community is that the ratio between the people who use it because it's there and, as it were, place demands on the infrastructure, and the number of people who are directly contributing to it becomes too high. Right? There are too many takers and not enough givers. And that's not because the takers are not willing to become givers, it's because it's a bit intimidating, right? That there's so much stuff. So as a community, I'd like to encourage us all to be very welcoming, not only in the ways that have already been spoken of, but help people in through the door so that they can become active contributors. Cabal was a fantastic way of giving a new doorway. Look at what's happened to Hackage. But I would like that to happen more with GHC and more with Cabal itself, actually, and Backpack, which we'll talk about tomorrow. Encourage people in, because increasingly, the only way Haskell will stay together and keep that vibrancy is if a lot of people contribute to making the moving parts continue to move. If we just take it for granted, eventually a number of people will go off pop, or that we rely on crucially, and then I'm not speaking about myself, I'm speaking about the Johan Tabels and the Duncan Kutzes of this world, and then where would we be? So we need to broaden the contribution base, I think.
Wouter.
Thanks. I just wanted to go on record as saying that I don't really think Haskell's dead. That was more than a little tongue-in-cheek. So what I do want to say, I agree with many of the points that Simon raised, that what I mean by such a statement is I'm looking for opportunities for growth. And we don't have a huge industrial background, which means that we're not going to go into this immortal status with millions of users. I don't think that that's something that we should want, and that's exactly the opinion that Simon voiced. In the same way, it's an opportunity for growth in terms of interesting and exciting PL research. There's a lot happening in Haskell, and it's very, very exciting. But there's a threat, in a sense, that we get overtaken by smaller, more agile languages. So I just want to maybe slightly nuance some of the points on record that I made during the talk. Don't get me wrong. I think Haskell has a kind of amazing future ahead of it. But I think it'll be very hard to compete, or increasingly hard to compete, with the industrial-backed languages as they might overtake us.
Hi, I'm Mark Lenzner from Google, but you probably know me as M0 on IRC.
So I wanted to address that perhaps, even if we want a slow trajectory to immortality rather than a fast trajectory to immortality, it's my opinion that a lot of what gets any language to immortality, as much as we love the language, which is why we're all here, much of it has little to do with the language itself. A lot of it has to do with really, I guess I would broadly class it deployability or usability of the entire system for someone. I'll give you a personal anecdote. 10 years ago, I encountered Haskell, and after 3 days of bashing on my machine to try to get it to compile something, I managed to compile something and then couldn't run it, and it was just very, 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 very hard. And when I got brought back to the Haskell fold, thanks to Brian O'Sullivan, several years later, I was like, wow, it's actually usable now. And it was a tremendous thing. And I think that certainly, I hate to say the word hockey stick, especially in light of our gentle long-term slope, but there really was a big uptake a couple of years ago when stuff became usable. So what I want to say is, when we look for ways to contribute, it's, I often hear people talk about, oh, we need to make it easier for people to add extensions to GHC, or new ways to play with types in GHC, or there's a lot of the entire ecosystem. Yes. There's a lot of help to add to. And that, what's going to get us the next, not 1,000 programmers, the next 10,000, 100,000 Haskell programmers, is going to be the ability for those programmers to just kind of, oh yeah, I got it, I used it, I built it, I deployed it. Right, because that's what, frankly, most successful languages, you could claim, I was old enough to remember when visual, like DBase 4 was actually a successful language. You never looked at that language? Right? These things are happenstance, but they got the point of right? So I'm just saying we have a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity for the community to do that part of the job of making our system even better.
So when I talk about broadening contribution there, I was specifically, particularly to the ecosystem.
So that's possibly the last question, because it's about lunchtime.
Okay. Eric Seidel, UC San Diego. I just kind of like to add another point of discussion, or I guess for people to take away / feature request, which is compilation times. So I'm sure this affects a lot of people, but so I work on Liquid Haskell, and we actually still have a large component of our system written in OCaml. And the OCaml portion takes less than 10 seconds to compile, but the Haskell portion takes a couple minutes to compile. So I think one of the biggest things, biggest differences in my day-to-day experience with Haskell would come from compilation times. It would be really useful to have some kind of really, really completely unoptimized, just get out some code that you can play around with as quick as possible.
Try O0.
Yes. That's what I was talking about. It takes a couple minutes to compile with O0.
Okay, that's about it.
And then send the patch.
So O-1.
Fritz, last word.
Just very briefly, I want to apologize again for my remarks yesterday and for the hurt that they caused. I especially want to apologize to the people that I hurt, and I can't ask those people to come to me. I would welcome them, discussion with them. I also want to apologize to people who see it as their job to help the community go in a good direction in these matters, and I would especially welcome input from them and discussion with them. I guess that's. I want to stress, though, that I did not feel driven from the room. I sort of withdrew myself voluntarily, and I really welcome the opportunity to return. I hope I'm not being presumptuous in that regard.
All right, thank you very much. That's the end of the session, and it's now lunchtime, and we start again at 1:30 or 2? Start again at 2.